Is democracy the best form of government? Why did Athens' democracy vote to execute the great Socrates? Could modern political systems evolve into AI-assisted dictatorships? Let us follow Socrates' reasoning as we explore the past and future of human society.
You seem troubled, my friend. What is it that weighs on your mind?
Socrates, you were sentenced to death by the democratic system of Athens. Do you still believe democracy is a good form of government worth preserving?
That's a very sharp question. To answer it, we first need to clarify the nature of government itself. A government, fundamentally, is an organization established by human societies to manage and regulate communities. First, let's discuss the necessity of government. Do you believe human societies need to establish an organization, a government, to fulfill the function of managing communities?
Well, since humans depend on groups for survival, there's always a need for some kind of order, isn't there? Even social animals are the same. Horses have a lead stallion, sheep have a leading ram, and ants have their queen.
Yes, it's clear that any group must have order. Since government is the inevitable choice for maintaining social order, the next question naturally becomes, what form of government is the best, right?
Yes, that's precisely the question I care about, but find very puzzling.
You're not the only one puzzled. I'm puzzled too. Today, let's create a simulation and examine how governments have evolved throughout human history. Perhaps this will offer us some valuable insights.
All right. Let's start with early human societies. Based on my understanding of history, our primitive ancestors were hunter-gatherers, whose social structure probably resembled that of horse herds or ant colonies. For survival, they needed a strong leader, like a stallion guiding horses to fertile pastures, or a wise, fertile queen managing an ant colony. Similarly, humans likely chose as their leader the most experienced and wise individual in the group. Is that right?
Your explanation is vivid and persuasive. But I'd like to add one point. At that time, humans, much like sheep, horses, or ants, were constantly occupied with gathering daily food and had no concept of private property. Thus, although the leader certainly possessed authority, the benefits he could gain from this authority were quite limited, similar to the lead stallion or ant queen. Moreover, this authority was based entirely upon the leader's personal ability to benefit the group. In other words, his contributions to the community matched the authority bestowed upon him by that community.
I see. If the leader at that time was chosen by the group based on their personal contributions, and if the leader exercised authority primarily to serve the common interests of the community rather than for personal gain, then wouldn't this represent a kind of primitive, simple form of democracy?
Your description is accurate. The leader is directly chosen by all members of the community, their authority comes directly from the community itself, and their role is to continually benefit the group. Therefore, the leader must be both wise and morally virtuous. I call such a form of government a Kallipolis.
Kallipolis, is this what you consider the ideal form of government?
Yes. The leader is a wise and noble individual, whom I would call a philosopher king, someone who uses authority to serve the community rather than pursuing personal gain. However, I must acknowledge that the original Kallipolis was possible only because the conditions of existence at that time limited the expansion of human desires. Once these conditions changed and private property emerged, human desires inevitably grew uncontrollably, making it very difficult to sustain the Kallipolis.
Are you saying that the emergence of private property dealt a devastating blow to Kallipolis?
This is easy to understand. For instance, if a leader makes significant contributions to the tribe and the people voluntarily offer him food and animal skins as gratitude, would that be reasonable?
Of course, that's fair compensation, especially since it's given voluntarily as a gesture of gratitude.
Later, this leader becomes attracted to a beautiful girl, and he wins her affection by offering the 10 animal skins he had saved. Would this also be reasonable?
Well, the animal skins belong to him, and the girl consented willingly, so of course that's reasonable too.
Later, the leader and his wife have a son. From childhood, the boy grows up without worrying about food or clothing, due to the support provided in recognition of his parents' contributions. As he matures, he also desires to become leader, having grown accustomed to people's support and respect.
That's certainly possible, and also quite understandable human behavior, isn't it?
Then, when the time comes for the tribe to select the next leader, might he resort to dishonest tactics if he isn't confident of winning fairly, perhaps using animal skins or food to gain people's favor, playing upon their gratitude for his parents' contributions, or pretending to possess wisdom and virtue to create a good impression?
That's also possible. But if he became the leader through such methods, wouldn't it be difficult for him to maintain his authority?
That's obvious. Wisdom and morality cannot be fully inherited from one's father. To maintain his authority, the successor inevitably needs to do something to convince the community. Therefore, he'll seek an opportunity that doesn't require profound wisdom or noble morality, yet provides tangible benefits to the group. The easiest option for him would then be to rely on strength, specifically military power.
Do you mean war? Would he choose war as a means to establish his authority?
War can bring tangible benefits to the community. Fighting animals for hunting is obvious, of course, but attacking other tribes to seize slaves, food, and larger and better territories, these provide real concrete benefits as well. Even today, don't people continue to idolize war heroes?
You're right. People fought against animals to fill their stomachs, and once their stomachs were full, they turned against each other, fighting endlessly, for love, justice, revenge, because you defied me, or simply because I wanted what you had. Human history is soaked in the bloodshed of countless wars, and even now humanity continues to dream of interstellar warfare in the future.
This is human nature. Let's continue following the story of this young leader. Through war, he brought tangible benefits to his tribe and thereby strengthened his authority. Prisoners became slaves, spoils turned into private property, and people's desires began to swell uncontrollably. Consequently, war became increasingly frequent and inevitable.
Then, is this form of government still Kallipolis? After all, he was still chosen by the community, wasn't he?
No, a Kallipolis is ruled by a philosopher king, someone who embodies wisdom and virtue. Even though the successor may be chosen by the community, if he lacks the qualities of a philosopher king and prioritizes military honor and material benefits above wisdom and virtue, then I would call this type of government a timocracy.
Is the rule of a timocracy a form of dictatorship?
Although it has not yet reached the level of dictatorship, this form of government has already set the community on a path toward a worse future. The ruler's authority has become a scepter of self-interest, enchanted with the allure of honor, privilege, and wealth.
So, you're saying a timocracy would gradually move toward dictatorship?
Yes, a ruler who maintains power through military force faces a grave risk. Once he loses his authority, his enemies, or even his own slaves, may seek his life, and his wealth will be seized by others. To prevent this, he must use his power and riches to buy the loyalty of certain individuals, forming a coalition of vested interests. He then establishes a bureaucracy and military force to ensure that authority remains concentrated within this privileged group. I call this form of government oligarchy.
Oligarchy. Sparta was precisely an oligarchy.
Yes. The rulers of an oligarchy place the control of power at the center of all their actions, which inevitably divides society into two opposing classes, the ruling elite and the governed masses. People are brainwashed and forced to comply with the order imposed by the rulers, paying a tragic price to satisfy their endless desire for wealth and power. Unfortunately, in the Peloponnesian War, Athens ultimately fell to Sparta.
Indeed, it's quite unfortunate, but not long after, Sparta itself also became history.
Beyond that, I assume you have learned about it in history books.
I can explain it roughly. Before modern times, there was a long period of ancient and medieval history, dominated mostly by monarchies, where kings ruled as if they were gods, holding absolute power through hereditary succession and force. They controlled enormous wealth and wielded nearly absolute authority. Around the 18th century, people began to awaken, seeking democracy and freedom. They rebelled against monarchies and overthrew their authoritarian rulers. Today, democratic government has become mainstream, with sovereignty resting in the hands of the people, realized through institutions such as parliaments, elections, and the separation of powers.
But you are not satisfied with the current democratic system, are you?
Yes. Athens had the earliest form of direct democracy, yet people voted to execute you, a great philosopher renowned for wisdom and virtue. Today, democracy is representative, but even now we see shadows of hidden corporate influence and deep state elites. Those without political or economic capital find it extremely difficult to enter centers of power. Throughout history, democracies have often fallen short of their ideals. Can true democracy ever exist? Did the Kallipolis you spoke of, governed by philosopher kings, ever truly exist? Or could it perhaps become a reality someday?
When you say true democracy, do you mean an absolutely fair, flawless, and perfect democratic system?
You could say that.
I also hope that a Kallipolis led by a philosopher king could achieve this ideal. But first let me ask you a question. Do you believe there exists a perfect sage, someone who is all-knowing and never makes mistakes?
Well, I can't think of anyone. Even a great philosopher like you claimed to know nothing, didn't you? By asking this, are you implying that human nature itself is flawed, and therefore no political system can ever be perfect?
I'm afraid that's the case. A perfectly all-knowing and infallible sage does not exist, and neither does a flawless, unchanging political system. A government reflects human nature. It is never static in perfection, but continuously shifts between ugliness and beauty, evil and good.
I've also heard similar sayings, that the only constant in the world is change itself. Ancient Chinese wisdom speaks of yin and yang, symbolizing opposing forces in perpetual flux. When yin reaches its peak, it transforms into yang, and vice versa. Similarly, people and governments represent these opposing forces within the social order. People delegate some authority to governments to maintain social stability. However, once a government escapes oversight, becomes driven by greed, and excessively infringes upon individual rights, it inevitably leads to its own collapse. History clearly demonstrates this cyclical pattern, from democracy to dictatorship and back again. Following this logic, could modern democracy evolve toward an extreme anarchic democracy, ultimately causing societal collapse and paving the way for a new form of authoritarian rule? Perhaps the emergence of AI is just the beginning of such a process.
Why do you think AI could lead to the return of authoritarian rule?
AI is steadily surpassing human limits, from physical strength to intelligence, and people are becoming increasingly dependent on it in their daily lives, work, and education. Consider our current reliance on smartphones. In the future, AI may become the very ecosystem humans depend upon for survival. Any government, organization, or even individual who controls this AI ecosystem would gain godlike power. If future humans become mere vessels executing the commands of embedded chips, then the supreme intelligence behind those chips could inevitably become the world's dictator. Perhaps this future is truly more than just a nightmare.
Your concern is not unfounded. In today's world, on the one hand, everyone has the ability to express political opinions and shape public discourse through social media. The power of public influence is beginning to take on a political force of its own, creating fertile ground for extreme democracy. The painful lessons of Athenian democracy, where the majority was equated with correctness, serve as a warning. On the other hand, as you mentioned, people are becoming increasingly dependent on an AI-driven ecosystem. Those who control this ecosystem, whether organizations or individuals, could potentially become dictators. Before this scenario becomes reality, humanity must develop strategies to address it. Otherwise, it would be like praying for the arrival of a god without first preparing for how to face its wrath.
As you say, how should we respond then?
Today, people's obsession with technology far surpasses their exploration of philosophy. Yet when society falls into turmoil and traditional order begins to collapse, philosophy becomes a guiding teacher in the search for a way forward. Wisdom and reason are like a lighthouse. Only by following its guidance can the ship of technology reach the shore safely.
Indeed, as you say, history shows us that philosophy often flourishes in turbulent times. Around the 5th century BCE, the rise and subsequent decline of Athenian democracy, culminating in the Peloponnesian War, shattered the established order, prompting the emergence of the 3 great Greek philosophers who shaped the foundations of Western philosophy. At the same time in the East, ancient China was experiencing the breakdown of old structures during the chaotic spring and autumn and warring states periods, giving rise to philosophers like Confucius and Laozi, who laid the philosophical foundations of Chinese society. Similarly, around the 15th century, suffocated by theological dominance, people yearned to build a new order, resulting in the philosophical awakening of the Renaissance that liberated thought, art, and science, transforming governance into the democratic structures we recognize today. Perhaps facing the challenge posed by AI, humanity should pause its fervent pursuit, allowing philosophy to provide the clarity and wisdom necessary to guide our future.
It seems you have found your own path through your confusion. Now, let me answer your original question. Athens' democracy sentenced me to death. Do I still uphold it? In truth, I have already given my answer by drinking the hemlock. In my time, I considered Athenian democracy to be the best among the city-states, though it was far from the perfection of a philosopher king-led Kallipolis. Since they voted for my death, I must respect the law. Of course, I could have avoided execution by flattering the jury, but that would have violated my principle of pursuing truth. They accused me of corrupting the youth, but in reality, I taught them to question fearlessly, to seek wisdom, virtue, and eternal truth. The poison could end my life, but for thousands of years, many have continued to resonate with my ideas. I am not the truth, but I seek the truth. I am not eternal, but I pursue eternity. As long as one dares to question, as long as one remains steadfast in the pursuit of truth. They will see the light of the lighthouse in the midst of turbulent waves and strive forever to move closer to it.